What if the reason you feel so tired lately isn't because you're weak, but because you've been trying to walk through life with only your natural eyes? What if the heaviness you can't explain, the strange tension in your chest, the way you sense something is off but you can't prove it, is actually your spirit whispering, "There's more here than you're seeing"? What if God has been trying to show you something, not loud, not dramatic, but quietly, patiently, the way light creeps into a room before you even realize the sun has risen? And what if the battles that keep repeating, the doors that won't open, the conversations that leave you confused, aren't random at all, but signals, shadows, hints that your spiritual vision is being stirred? Because there are seasons when life feels like you're walking through fog. You're doing everything you know how to do. You're showing up. You're pushing through. You're praying, sometimes with words, sometimes with nothing but silent breathing and tired hope. But still, something feels blocked. You can't explain it to anyone without sounding dramatic, so you keep it inside. You smile when you can. You nod when people talk. You try to be fine. Yet deep down, there's an inner conflict you can't shake. On one side, you want peace. On the other, your mind won't stop scanning for danger. On one side, you believe God is with you. On the other, you keep wondering why it feels like you're alone in it. And that confusion can be exhausting, because it's not just about circumstances, it's about clarity. It's about being unable to see what's really happening. Some people seem steady, almost unshakable, like they're anchored in something invisible. And maybe you've watched that kind of faith from a distance and thought, why can't I feel that? Why do I keep panicking? Why do I keep missing what I'm supposed to understand? If that's you, I want you to know something gently. You're not crazy. You're not behind. You're not forgotten. Sometimes the ache you feel is not failure. It's invitation. So just stay with me here, not to be taught like you're a problem to fix, but to breathe for a moment and let your heart be seen. Because maybe, just maybe, God isn't punishing you with confusion. Maybe He's preparing you for vision. There's a certain kind of pain that doesn't show up on the outside. It's not the kind people notice right away. It doesn't always make you cry in front of others. Sometimes it doesn't even look like sadness. Sometimes it looks like functioning. You still wake up. You still answer messages. You still do what needs to be done. But inside, something feels disconnected, like your soul is walking a few steps behind your body. And the hardest part is, you can't always explain why. Because nothing may be wrong enough to justify how heavy it feels. No obvious disaster, no dramatic collapse. Just this slow, quiet weight that follows you into the day. You try to pray, but the words feel thin. You try to worship, but your mind keeps drifting back to what's unresolved. You try to trust, but your heart keeps whispering, "What if I'm missing something?" And that's where the tension grows. Not just tension with life, but tension inside your own faith. Because you believe God is real, yet you still feel uncertain. You believe He speaks, yet you struggle to hear Him clearly. You believe He guides, yet you keep arriving at moments where you don't know what to choose, who to trust, what to release, what to hold. So you start second-guessing everything. You replay conversations. You analyze someone's tone. You wonder if that opportunity was a blessing or a trap. You wonder if that closed door was protection or punishment. You wonder if you're being tested or if you've failed. And that uncertainty can create a quiet kind of exhaustion, the kind that sleep doesn't fix, the kind where even your rest still feels tense. Because it's hard to rest when you don't know what's really happening. And maybe you felt this too. You can sense something beneath the surface, something spiritual, something deeper. But it's like trying to see through glass that keeps fogging up. You can't tell if it's fear or discernment. You can't tell if it's anxiety or warning. You can't tell if it's your emotions talking or God trying to protect you. So you carry the uncertainty alone. And sometimes that loneliness doesn't come from being physically alone. It comes from being the only one who knows how loud your inner world has become. Maybe you've even wondered, why am I still struggling with this? Why do I keep repeating the same battles? Why do I feel surrounded, like something is closing in, yet I can't point to a single thing and say, this is it? And if you're honest, it can feel like you're walking through life with your spiritual senses muted. Like you're trying your best to follow God, but the signal feels weak. Like the world is loud and heaven feels quiet. If that's where you are, I want to say this slowly. It makes sense that you're tired. It makes sense that you feel unsure. It makes sense that your heart feels stretched. Because when your spiritual vision is dim, everything becomes harder than it needs to be. Even small decisions feel heavy. Even normal days feel like a battle. Even peace feels distant, because you don't know what's behind what you're facing. And yet, even here, even in this fog, God is not angry at you for struggling to see. Sometimes the fog is not a sign that God left. Sometimes it's the moment right before He opens your eyes. What if the confusion you've been feeling isn't something to fight against, but something to listen to? What if the uncertainty isn't proof that you're lost, but evidence that your spirit is being stretched beyond what it used to rely on? Because there are moments when God doesn't immediately remove the fog. Not to frustrate you, but to gently shift how you see. You see, when life is clear and predictable, we lean on patterns. We rely on what worked before. We move on instinct, habit, and familiarity. But when clarity fades, when the old ways of understanding stop working, that's often when God begins inviting us into a deeper kind of sight. Not vision that comes from control, but vision that comes from trust. Maybe the problem isn't that you don't care enough. Maybe it's not that you lack faith. Maybe it's not that you're doing something wrong. Maybe you've simply reached the edge of what your natural perception can carry. And that can feel unsettling, because it means the answers you're looking for won't come the same way they used to. They won't come through overthinking. They won't come through replaying the past. They won't come through trying harder or pushing faster. They come through awakening. Awakening to the idea that not everything you face is meant to be understood immediately. Awakening to the truth that some battles are not about strength, but about awareness. Awakening to the reality that God doesn't always change the situation first. Sometimes He changes the way you see it. And that's where this journey begins. Not with information, not with rules, not with pressure to get it right, but with a willingness to pause, to soften, to admit, I don't see clearly right now, and I need help. Because spiritual vision isn't about seeing angels in the sky or hearing voices in the night. It's about discernment. It's about being able to sense what's true beneath what's loud. It's about recognizing what's from God and what isn't, even when both look convincing on the surface. And maybe, without realizing it, you've already been preparing for this. The restlessness, the questions, the dissatisfaction with shallow answers, the sense that something big is forming, even though you can't name it yet. Those are not signs of weakness, they're signs of readiness. So as we move forward, we're not going to rush. We're not going to overwhelm your mind. We're going to gently uncover what blocks spiritual clarity, what opens it, and why some people walk in quiet confidence while others stay trapped in fear. Not so you can become special, but so you can become aware. Because once your eyes begin to open, everything changes. Not because life becomes easy, but because you're no longer walking blind. And the next step in this journey is understanding why spiritual vision becomes necessary in the first place. What's really happening beneath the surface of your struggles. That's where we're going next. At first glance, it always looks like the problem is out there. The situation, the person, the delay, the closed door, the pressure that won't ease. We naturally assume, if this would change, I'd be okay. If the conflict resolved, if the fear disappeared, if the answer came faster. But beneath what you're facing on the surface, there's something deeper happening. Because the real struggle is rarely just about what you're going through. It's about how you're seeing it. Two people can stand in the same situation. One feels crushed, panicked, overwhelmed. The other feels grounded, calm, strangely steady. Same pressure, same uncertainty, different inner reality. And that difference isn't personality. It isn't intelligence. It isn't emotional toughness. It's vision. When spiritual vision is dim, life feels louder than God. Threats feel bigger than promises. What's immediate feels more real than what's eternal. You start reacting instead of discerning. You start defending instead of listening. You start rushing instead of waiting. And none of that makes you weak. It makes you human. Because when you can't see what's really happening, your nervous system takes over. Fear becomes a guide. Urgency becomes wisdom. Control starts masquerading as faith. So the surface problem might look like anxiety, or confusion, or frustration with people, or exhaustion that never seems to lift. But the root issue is often this. You're trying to navigate spiritual battles with natural sight alone. And natural sight is limited. It only sees what's immediate. It only measures what's visible. It only reacts to what's loudest. That's why you can pray and still panic. Believe and still feel unsafe. Trust God and still feel like everything depends on you. Because faith without spiritual perception becomes fragile. You may love God deeply, but without discernment, every obstacle feels personal. Every delay feels like rejection. Every silence feels like abandonment. So you start questioning yourself. Did I hear God wrong? Did I miss something? Am I doing enough? Why does this keep happening? And the truth is, nothing may be wrong with your desire to follow God. What's missing is clarity. Spiritual vision doesn't remove challenges. It reveals meaning within them. It helps you recognize when something is an attack and when it's an invitation to grow. It helps you know when to fight and when to rest. It helps you see people not just as they appear, but as they truly are, wounded, fearful, searching, or sent. Without that vision, everything feels personal and heavy. With it, you begin to move differently, calmer, slower, more intentional. Which is why God often addresses vision before he addresses circumstances. Because if he changes the situation without changing your sight, you'll just repeat the same struggle in a different form. And that leads us to something important: the quiet, often invisible consequences of living without spiritual clarity. When spiritual vision is unclear, the damage doesn't always announce itself. It unfolds quietly, slowly, in ways that are easy to overlook until they've already taken root. One of the first places it shows up is in your relationships. You start misreading people. You sense distance where there is none, or trust where there should be caution. You react to tone instead of intention. You assume motives instead of seeking truth. And without realizing it, you begin responding to people through fear instead of wisdom. Conversations become heavier than they need to be. Misunderstandings linger. You feel unseen, unheard, unsupported, even when no one is actually trying to harm you. Another consequence appears in your emotional life. You carry tension you can't name. You feel restless even on calm days. You struggle to fully relax because your spirit is always scanning, waiting for the next problem to appear. Joy feels temporary. Peace feels fragile. And you may find yourself emotionally drained by situations that shouldn't carry that much weight. Then there's the impact on your decision-making. Without spiritual discernment, choices become exhausting. You overthink. You hesitate. You second-guess what you've already prayed about. You ask 10 people for advice, then feel even more confused than before. Not because guidance is bad, but because you're trying to replace inner clarity with external reassurance. And perhaps the most painful consequence is the inner disconnection. You still believe, you still care, but something feels distant. Scripture doesn't land the way it used to. Prayer feels more like effort than communion. You talk to God, but struggle to sense Him with you. So you keep going, faithful on the outside, uncertain on the inside. And the danger here isn't failure. The danger is numbness. When vision stays dim long enough, the heart adapts. It lowers expectations. It stops asking deeper questions. It settles for survival instead of connection. You may even start telling yourself, this is just how life is. This is just how faith feels now. This is just something I have to manage. But that quiet resignation is not what God desires for you. Because you were never meant to navigate life guessing what's true, what's safe, or what's from Him. Spiritual vision doesn't just protect you from big mistakes, it guards you from slow erosion, from drifting without noticing, from living reactive instead of rooted, from confusing endurance with peace. And beneath all these consequences, there's something even deeper driving them. A hidden fear most people don't like to name. That's what we need to talk about next. Beneath the overthinking, beneath the tension, beneath the constant need to figure everything out, there is often a quiet fear we don't like to admit. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind we talk about in prayer requests, but a subtle one. The fear of being unprotected. The fear that if you don't stay alert, if you don't analyze everything, if you don't keep your guard up, something will slip past you. You'll miss a warning. You'll trust the wrong person. You'll make the wrong choice. You'll end up hurt again. So you watch closely. You replay moments. You read between lines that may not even be there. And over time, vigilance becomes exhausting. But here's the painful truth most people never say out loud. That hyper-awareness often comes from believing, deep down, that God might not step in unless you stay in control. Not because you don't love Him, not because you don't believe in Him, but because somewhere along the way, you were disappointed, confused, left without the clarity you needed in a critical moment. So your heart learned to compensate. If I stay alert, I'll be safe. If I figure it out early, I won't be blindsided. If I manage everything carefully, I won't fall apart. And slowly, without intending to, you started relying more on your own perception than on God's protection. That's the hidden fear. The fear that if you stop scanning, stop controlling, stop trying to see everything yourself, you'll be vulnerable. But spiritual vision was never meant to come from anxiety. It was never meant to come from self-protection. True discernment flows from trust, from knowing that even when you don't see everything, God does. And this is where many people get stuck. They want peace, but they're afraid to release control. They want clarity, but they're scared of surrender. They want to see spiritually, but they don't want to admit how much they've been carrying alone. Which is why this next part matters. Because sometimes God doesn't explain fear away. He tells a story that gently exposes it. A story that shows us what happens when someone sees only what's in front of them, and what changes when spiritual eyes are opened. Which is why this story matters. The city was still asleep when the servant stepped outside. The air was cool. The streets were quiet. The kind of silence that usually feels safe. But that morning, something was wrong. As his eyes adjusted to the light, his breath caught in his throat. Everywhere he looked, horses, chariots, soldiers, steel glinting in the early sun, armor lining the hills, an entire army wrapped around the city like a tightening fist. There was no warning, no time to prepare, no escape route, just the realization that they were surrounded. The servant's heart began to race. He wasn't a warrior. He had no sword in his hand, no strategy in his mind. All he could see were numbers, weapons, inevitable loss. So he ran. He burst into the place where the prophet was staying, his voice shaking, his words tumbling over each other. "What are we going to do?" It wasn't just a question. It was a confession. "I can't see a way out. I don't understand what God is doing. This feels bigger than us." And standing there, calm, unhurried, grounded, was the prophet, Elisha. A man who looked at the same hills, the same army, the same threat, and felt no panic, no rush, no fear. Because while the servant saw danger closing in, Elisha saw something else entirely. Not because he was braver, not because he was careless, but because he had learned to see beyond what was visible. The servant's flaw wasn't weakness, it was limitation. He was seeing with honest eyes, just not awakened ones. And that's the tension of this moment. Two people, same location, same threat. One overwhelmed, one at peace. One reacting to what he could see, one resting in what he knew. And the question hanging in the air wasn't just, will they survive? It was something deeper. What happens when fear meets spiritual vision? The servant couldn't stop looking. Every direction he turned confirmed the same truth. There were too many of them. He could hear movement now. The low sounds of an army settling into position. The quiet confidence of soldiers who knew the outcome was already decided. His thoughts spiraled. This is it. We've been found. There's no escape. And with every passing second, the fear grew heavier. Because fear always fills the space where understanding is missing. He imagined what would happen next. Capture, humiliation, death. And standing beside him, Elisha said nothing. No command, no strategy, no speech. Just silence. A silence that felt unbearable to the servant. Because when you're afraid, stillness feels like inaction. Finally, Elisha spoke. Not to the servant, but to God. A simple prayer. No urgency in his voice, no desperation. Lord, open his eyes. That was it. No request for the army to disappear. No plea for rescue. No demand for intervention. Just vision. And in that moment, the story shifted. Not on the hills, not in the streets, inside the servant. Because fear doesn't always end when danger leaves. Sometimes it ends when perception changes. Suddenly, what once looked empty was alive. The hills that had felt hostile now blazed with presence, fire, movement, power. An unseen army, horses and chariots of fire, surrounding them from every side. They had been there all along. The servant hadn't been abandoned. He had been unaware. And that realization hit harder than the fear ever did. Because the most painful part wasn't that he was surrounded by enemies. It was that he had been surrounded by help and didn't know it. The threat hadn't vanished, but its meaning had. What once felt like certain defeat now felt small, limited, temporary. Because when you finally see what God is doing behind the scenes, fear loses its authority. The servant didn't speak. He couldn't. Words felt too small for what his eyes were now taking in. The same hills that had moments ago pressed fear into his chest were now alive with fire. Not the kind that destroys, but the kind that protects. He stood there, breathing slowly, as something inside him settled for the first time that morning. Nothing outside had changed. The enemy was still present. The city was still surrounded. The threat was still real. But the story was no longer the same. Because now he understood something that fear had hidden from him. They were never outnumbered. The silence returned. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was full. Full of assurance. Full of presence. Full of the quiet confidence that comes when you realize you're not responsible for holding everything together. Elisha didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply stood, as if this had always been true. As if heaven's help was never in question. Because for him, it wasn't new. This was how he had learned to live. Not by denying danger, but by seeing beyond it. And that is where the transformation happened. Not just in the servant's understanding of the moment, but in his understanding of God. He learned that God's protection doesn't always announce itself, that help doesn't always come in visible form, that the absence of evidence is not the absence of presence. From that day forward, fear would never sound the same to him again. Because once you've seen what's unseen, you can't go back to interpreting life the same way. The battle didn't end with victory that day. It ended with vision. And vision changes everything. Which brings the story closer than you might expect. Because maybe, just maybe, you've been standing in a place like that servant, surrounded, overwhelmed, certain you're alone. And maybe the prayer you need isn't for escape, but for sight. Maybe you've been standing in situations that feel bigger than you. Maybe you wake up already bracing yourself, not because anything has happened yet, but because your spirit has learned to expect pressure. Maybe you've looked around at your life and thought, I don't see support. I don't see solutions. I don't see a way out. And like the servant, you're not wrong about what you see. You really are facing something real. The stress is real. The uncertainty is real. The weight you carry is real. But maybe what's missing isn't effort, it's perspective. Maybe you've been interpreting every challenge as a threat instead of asking what might be happening behind the scenes. Maybe you've been assuming silence means absence, when it might actually mean protection is already in place. And maybe, without realizing it, you've been blaming yourself for feeling afraid. But fear doesn't always mean a lack of faith. Sometimes it simply means you're seeing the situation from a human angle alone. Maybe you've been asking God to remove the pressure, when what you need is the ability to see why you're not as vulnerable as you feel. And maybe, like that servant, you've been praying, God, what should I do? When the deeper prayer is, God, help me see. Because when you begin to see differently, your reactions soften. Your urgency slows. Your heart stops racing ahead of reality. Not because the problem disappears, but because it no longer defines the truth. And that realization can be gentle, but it can also be uncomfortable. Because it asks you to admit something, that you may have been living as if you were alone in battles where God was already present. And here's where the struggle becomes deeply personal. Because once you sense that there might be more going on than you can see, a quiet conflict rises inside you. Part of you wants to believe it. You want to rest. You want to stop bracing for impact. You want to trust that God is actually surrounding you, protecting you, guiding you. But another part of you resists. Because if you stop being hyper-aware, what if something goes wrong? If you loosen your grip, what if you miss a warning? If you trust God to handle what you can't see, what if He doesn't act the way you expect? So you hover in between faith and fear, between surrender and self-protection, between peace and vigilance. You might even feel guilt about this tension. You tell yourself, I should be stronger. I should trust more. I shouldn't still be struggling with this. But inner conflict doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're standing at the edge of growth. Because growth always asks something of us. It asks us to release the familiar, even when the familiar is exhausting. It asks us to let go of coping mechanisms that once kept us safe. It asks us to believe that God sees what we don't. And that's hard. Especially if you've been disappointed before. Especially if you've trusted and been hurt. Especially if you've learned the painful lesson that life doesn't always turn out the way you hoped. So your heart hesitates. It wants peace, but it doesn't want to be naive. It wants faith, but it doesn't want to be blindsided. And that hesitation can feel like a failure of belief. But it's not. It's a moment of honesty. A moment where you admit, I want to trust God, but I'm afraid of what happens if I do. And God is not offended by that confession. He doesn't demand instant surrender. He doesn't shame you for being cautious. He meets you right there, in that tension. Because the next step isn't about forcing yourself to believe harder. It's about being invited, gently, to see differently. So here is the invitation. Not loud, not forceful, not demanding. An invitation to shift, not strain. What if change doesn't begin with you doing more, but with you seeing more clearly? What if God isn't asking you to ignore danger, but to stop letting danger be the loudest voice in the room? Because spiritual vision doesn't turn you careless. It makes you anchored. It doesn't remove wisdom. It removes panic. And maybe that's the change being offered to you right now. Not a dramatic overhaul of your life, not instant certainty, not perfect peace overnight, but a subtle reorientation of your heart. From, I have to figure this out, to, I am being held, even while I don't understand. From, I must stay alert at all times, to, God is already ahead of me. From, I'm surrounded by threats, to, I may be surrounded by help I can't yet see. This kind of change doesn't happen by force. It happens by permission. By allowing yourself to pause instead of react. By choosing to pray instead of assume. By asking for vision instead of answers. And that can feel vulnerable. Because you're used to protecting yourself. You're used to managing outcomes. You're used to staying one step ahead. But what if, just for a moment, you let yourself believe that God's awareness is greater than yours? That His protection doesn't depend on your anxiety? That His guidance isn't activated by your fear? That His presence doesn't withdraw when you rest? Hope begins there. Not the kind that ignores reality, but the kind that stands inside reality with a different posture. And that posture opens the door to something deeper. Because spiritual vision doesn't grow in pressure. It grows in alignment. Which brings us to a deeper anchor. A place where trust is modeled not through effort, but through surrender. That's where we're going next. There is a moment in Scripture that doesn't shout, it rests. A scene where strength is not displayed through action, but through restraint. Jesus is asleep in a boat. The waves are violent. The wind is relentless. Water is filling the vessel faster than it can be emptied. Experienced fishermen, men who know storms, are panicking. They shout, they scramble, they fear for their lives. And there He is, unmoved, undisturbed, sleeping. Not because the storm isn't real, but because His awareness reaches beyond it. This moment has always carried a quiet authority, because it reveals something most of us struggle to believe. Peace is not the absence of chaos. Peace is the presence of trust. The disciples didn't lack faith because they were afraid of the storm. They lacked vision. They couldn't yet see who was with them in it. When they woke Jesus, they didn't ask for wisdom. They didn't ask for clarity. They asked for rescue. And Jesus did calm the storm, but not before asking a question that still echoes today. Why are you so afraid? Not as accusation, but as invitation. Because fear had narrowed their sight. It had reduced reality to wind and waves. And like them, we often do the same. We forget that God's presence in our life doesn't fluctuate with circumstances. We forget that storms do not cancel calling. We forget that chaos does not mean abandonment. Jesus wasn't asleep because He didn't care. He was asleep because He knew. And that knowing, the deep, unshaken awareness of the Father's will, is the anchor of spiritual vision. Not striving, not constant vigilance, but trust that allows rest even when things are unresolved. This is the kind of vision God invites us into. A vision where faith doesn't panic, where awareness replaces urgency, where presence outweighs pressure. And yet, there is another layer to this anchor. Because seeing clearly doesn't always mean doing something. Sometimes it means knowing when not to. There is a strength that looks like stillness. Not the stillness of giving up, but the stillness of someone who understands timing. Jesus did not calm the storm immediately. He remained asleep while the waves rose, while the wind screamed, while panic filled the boat. And that detail matters. Because if peace only comes after the storm stops, then peace is fragile. But the peace Jesus carried existed before the waves obeyed him. That kind of restraint is rare. It comes from knowing that not every threat requires a reaction. Not every noise deserves attention. Not every moment of discomfort is a crisis. Silence, in this sense, is not passivity. It's alignment. It's the confidence that God is not rushed, that heaven is not frantic, that divine purpose is not threatened by temporary turbulence. We often confuse action with faith. We assume that if we are not doing something, we are failing. But spiritual vision teaches us discernment, when to move and when to wait. Jesus stood before accusations and remained silent. He faced mockery without defense. He walked toward the cross without resistance. Not because he was powerless, but because he was surrendered. And surrender is not weakness. It is the deepest form of trust. Trust that God sees the full picture. Trust that delay does not mean denial. Trust that silence can be obedience. For many of us, restraint is harder than action. Because action makes us feel useful. Stillness forces us to confront what we're afraid to release. But this is where spiritual vision matures. When you realize you don't have to explain yourself to everyone. You don't have to react to every misunderstanding. You don't have to fight every battle that presents itself. Some storms are allowed to reveal where your peace comes from. And when you stop reacting out of fear, you begin responding out of wisdom. That restraint, that holy pause, creates space for meaning. Which brings us to why all of this matters in your life right now. Because this anchor, this way of seeing, was never meant to stay on the pages of Scripture. It was meant to settle into your life, into the moments when you want to defend yourself but feel a nudge to be quiet, into the seasons when you want answers but sense God asking you to wait, into the situations where everything in you wants to do something, yet peace keeps whispering, "Not yet." Spiritual vision doesn't remove responsibility. It clarifies it. It teaches you that not every opportunity is an assignment. Not every conflict is yours to solve. Not every delay is a setback. Some moments are invitations to trust what you cannot yet see. And that trust reshapes how you move through the world. You begin to recognize when fear is driving your urgency. You begin to notice when anxiety is disguising itself as wisdom. You begin to sense when God is asking for patience, not pressure. This kind of vision protects you. It keeps you from exhausting yourself trying to manage outcomes that were never yours to control. It guards your heart from reacting to every wave that hits the boat. It grounds you when circumstances try to pull you into panic. And maybe this is why you felt so tired lately. Not because life has been too demanding, but because you've been carrying battles that spiritual vision would have laid down. God's desire isn't to make you passive, it's to make you aware. Aware of His nearness, aware of His timing, aware of His presence in the middle of unresolved things. Because when you begin to see this way, you don't lose strength, you conserve it. You don't lose passion, you focus it. You don't lose faith, you deepen it. And from that place of clarity, something practical begins to form. Not theory, not inspiration alone, but a new way of living. That's where we go next. Here is where everything quietly shifts. Not because your circumstances suddenly improve, but because the lens you look through changes. Before, reaction felt necessary. Now, wisdom begins to feel possible. Before, control felt like safety. Now, trust begins to feel stronger. You start to notice the difference between responding out of fear and responding out of clarity. Reaction is fast, it's urgent, it's loud inside your chest. Wisdom is slower, it listens. It waits for peace to settle before it moves. Reaction says, I have to fix this now. Wisdom asks, what is God already doing here? Reaction tightens your body. Wisdom softens it. Reaction drains you. Wisdom steadies you. And this reframing doesn't make you careless. It makes you conscious. You begin to see that trust is not pretending everything is okay. It's choosing not to panic when it isn't. You begin to understand that faith isn't forcing outcomes. It's aligning your heart with God's pace. And maybe for the first time in a long while, you realize how much energy you've been spending on survival mode. Spiritual vision invites you out of that place, not into denial, but into discernment. And discernment becomes practical when it turns into small, grounded choices, the kind that reshape your days quietly, steadily, without pressure. That's what we'll walk through next. This is where spiritual vision becomes something you can live, not just feel. Not dramatic steps, not overwhelming changes, just grounded movements that gently retrain how you see. Step 1. Pause before you interpret. When something triggers you, a message, a silence, a delay, don't ask, what does this mean, right away. First ask, what am I feeling in my body right now? Because fear loves to speak before truth has time to arrive. Example, you receive a short reply and immediately assume rejection. Pause. Breathe. Notice the tension. Inner question. Am I reacting to facts or to fear? Step 2. Separate what you see from what you assume. Spiritual vision grows when you stop filling in the blanks with anxiety. Facts are neutral. Assumptions carry emotion. Example, a door closes. The fact, the door is closed. The assumption, God is saying no forever. Those are not the same thing. Inner question, what do I know for sure, and what am I adding? Step 3. Ask for sight, not answers. Most of us pray, God, fix this. But vision comes when you pray, God, show me. Not show me the outcome. Show me the truth beneath the moment. Example, instead of asking, why is this happening? Try, what are you forming in me here? Inner question, what is God trying to reveal, not remove? Step 4. Practice holy restraint. You don't need to respond to everything immediately. Some clarity only comes after stillness. Example: you feel the urge to explain yourself, to defend, to prove. Wait. Silence is not losing. It's listening. Inner question: is this moment asking for action or trust? Step 5. End the day with reflection, not judgment. At night, don't review your day to criticize yourself. Review it to notice. Where did peace show up? Where did fear take over? Where did God quietly protect you? Example: you realize a situation didn't spiral the way you expected. That's vision working. Inner question: where did God show up today, even subtly? These steps don't make life perfect. They make you aware. And awareness is where spiritual sight strengthens. But one more thing needs to be said, clearly and safely, because spiritual vision is often misunderstood. This is important, so listen gently. Spiritual vision does not mean enduring harm in silence. It does not mean ignoring abuse, manipulation, or repeated violation of your boundaries. It does not mean staying where your soul is being crushed and calling it faith. Wisdom and trust are not the same as passivity. There is a difference between restraint and self-erasure. There is a difference between patience and enabling harm. There is a difference between surrendering control to God and surrendering your safety to people who misuse it. Sometimes the clearest spiritual vision says, "This is not mine to tolerate. This pattern is not from God. Love does not require me to disappear." Jesus withdrew from crowds. He walked away from hostile spaces. He confronted injustice directly. He set boundaries, even when misunderstood. So if you are in a situation where you feel unsafe, controlled, demeaned, or emotionally harmed, clarity may not lead you to endure longer. It may lead you to step back. Spiritual sight protects. It alerts you when something consistently produces fear instead of peace. It warns you when your body tightens every time a certain person speaks. It reminds you that God's will never requires the destruction of your dignity. Silence can be holy. But silence in the face of ongoing harm is not wisdom, it's injury. Trust includes discernment. Faith includes boundaries. Love includes truth. And if you've ever confused endurance with obedience, or suffering with righteousness, or fear with humility, let this be the correction your heart needed. God does not ask you to stay blind to what is hurting you. He opens your eyes so you can walk safely, wisely, and whole. And now, after everything we've uncovered, after the fear, the clarity, the reframing, the boundaries, there is only one place left to go. A place of rest. A place of release. A place where vision settles into peace. Take a breath here. Not a rushed one. Not the kind you take when you're bracing yourself. A slow breath. The kind that tells your nervous system, you're safe right now. You've walked through a lot in this journey. Fear that stayed unnamed. Pressure you didn't realize you were carrying. Battles you thought you had to face alone. And maybe, for the first time in a while, your shoulders feel a little lighter. Not because everything is resolved, but because you're no longer forcing yourself to see everything at once. You don't need perfect clarity tonight. You don't need answers for every tomorrow. You don't need to fix your entire life in one moment. What you need is permission to rest in what you do know. That God sees you. That He has not been absent. That even in seasons of confusion, you were not unprotected. Spiritual vision doesn't flood in all at once. It arrives quietly, gently, like dawn. And maybe what you're feeling right now isn't excitement, but calm. A calm that says, I don't have to fight tonight. A calm that whispers, I can let go, just for now. That calm is not emptiness. It's peace beginning to settle. Now comes the quiet letting go. Not the kind that feels like giving up, but the kind that feels like placing something heavy down after carrying it for far too long. Surrender doesn't ask you to understand everything. It asks you to stop carrying everything alone. It's the moment you say, without drama, without performance, I don't need to see the whole path. I don't need to control every outcome. I don't need to stay tense to stay safe. It's trusting that God's awareness is deeper than your worry, that His protection doesn't depend on your vigilance, that His presence doesn't withdraw when you rest. Surrender is not closing your eyes. It's opening your hands. It's allowing yourself to believe that clarity will come at the pace your soul can handle. Not all at once, not by force, not through pressure. And maybe the bravest thing you can do right now is stop asking yourself to be strong, to let God be the one who sees ahead, to let God be the one who stands watch tonight. You don't need to solve tomorrow before you sleep. You don't need to rehearse what might go wrong. You don't need to carry every possibility in your chest. You are allowed to rest in unanswered trust. That is surrender. Let this be a quiet prayer, not rushed, not perfected, just honest. God, I don't ask to see everything. I ask to see enough to trust you. Open my eyes where fear has narrowed them. Soften my heart where control has hardened it. Teach me to recognize your presence, not just in miracles, but in ordinary moments where you are already at work. If I have been blind to your protection, gently show me. If I have been carrying what was never mine, help me release it. Let my vision be shaped by truth, not anxiety. And when I don't understand, teach me how to rest anyway. Amen. And here is the only gentle invitation I'll leave you with. Tonight, or sometime soon, sit quietly for a few minutes. No music, no scrolling, no fixing. Just ask one simple question. God, what have you been trying to show me? Then listen, not with pressure, but with openness. Spiritual vision doesn't arrive through force. It arrives through willingness. And if something in this journey stirred your heart, let it keep working in you. Because you are not walking blind anymore. You are learning to see.